Greetings and welcome to the Dream Syndicate. In today's video, we're going to be getting up to something new, making a one-part silicone mold and casting resin from this creature here that are called dreans. I made this little slug-like critter from Epoxy Sculpt and he sort of bursted from my head and hands quicker than I can get the camera rolling. Dreans can be tricky like that. When I decided I wanted to cast a mold of this little guy, I popped out his eyes. I know, not very nice and kinda dark, but I wanted to be able to put all kinds of different eyes in their eye sockets, and I'll have the added bonus of only having to glue in whatever eyes I wanted to use, rather than having to paint them. And I can play around with using some really wild, exotic eyes for these critters. Here's a few variations I did in Photoshop. To make the mold, we're going to need a form to cast into that's not going to leak. I saved these little sauce containers from takeout for just such an emergency. As you can see, our dream creature fits inside of it pretty well, but there's some extra room around them which we'll need. Next I'm going to trace the lid of the sauce container to another flat bit of plastic scrap with a Sharpie and then cut it out. We want to kind of bond the sculpt to the base of the mold, so put a dab of hot glue on the bottom and quickly, while the glue's still hot, firmly press it down. Here you can see what it looks like from the underside. Then we're going to cut away the bottom of the sauce container. This is actually going to become the top of our mold. And now we'll run hot glue all around the base. We're going to create a liquid tight seal with the glue. You also want to be careful not to get the tip of the hot glue gun too close to the plastic, because it'll definitely melt it easily. There's our impenetrable 100% liquid tight hot glue seal, he says without a touch of irony. We'll just add a bit of shipping tape to the top. This will give us a little extra height to our mold. Because this mold's going to be so small, the tape didn't go on all that smoothly, and I'm also wondering if the clear packing tape's better for the job. Here you can see everything put together and ready to go. It may not look beautiful, but it'll get the job done. The job of making tiny creatures. Now we're just going to dust our sculpt with baby powder. Baby powder is supposed to help capture the details of a sculpt as it pulls liquids towards it. I did feel a little weird using something made out of babies. We'll just take this soft, dry paintbrush and try to get the baby powder in all the little cracks and crevices of the sculpt. It would have probably been a good idea to dump out the excess powder too, but I didn't do that. What we're going to use to make our silicone mold is this Moldstar 15 Slow. I'll put links below where you can get all the materials I'm going to be using. You want to use some sort of cup that's going to help you measure, like the way solo cups have markings along them, or you can also use silicone measuring cups. You're going to mix equal amounts of part A and B. There's a whole method for calculating exactly how much you need to mix to mold something. I didn't do any of that. I just sort of guesstimated and erred on the side of mixing too much. On the plus side, if you save your silicone scraps, or failed molds, you can actually use pieces and add them to future molds so they end up using less silicone. This stuff pours out pretty thick, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised since it's a mixture to basically make rubber. Now we'll just add the two parts of the compound together, trying to get all of it out with our trusty popsicle stick, and getting it thoroughly mixed up. As I got to the end of mixing, I tried to press out any bubbles I saw in the liquid since bubbles in your mold will screw up your castings. I also learned that doing long slow pours of your silicone will help reduce the appearance of bubbles, which I didn't do here. In some instances, this is kind of an anti-tutorial or learn from my mistakes video. Sometimes you just gotta learn by doing even if it's kinda wrong at first. We'll pour the rest of our liquid silicone into our mold form. And here's what the mold looks like when it's had a chance to cure overnight. You might say, huh, that's weird. I don't remember all that glue on the side of the impenetrable 100% liquid tight hot glue seal. Yeah, about that. The silicone started leaking out of a hole on the side. Luckily there was enough extra silicone in the mold. The leak was slow because the liquid's so thick, and I was able to put it in a plastic container and patch the hole with a mound of hot glue real quick. And now this is kind of going to turn into an unboxing video. There's some little silicone scraps that we'll hold on to for future molds. We'll just peel away this layer of plastic like we're peeling away a hard-boiled egg.
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
Okay, we've got the mold out and we can see the bottom of our dream sculpt. You can see the little divots the extra baby powder formed in the bottom of the mold. Now we're going to carefully cut along the contours of the sculpt. The silicone's super thin, so it'll cut easily. Toward the end of this video, I'll tell you the lore behind the existence of dreams. Here I'm stretching the mold around the creature to try and get it to pop out easier. I'm kind of nervous about the antenna, so I'm trying to lever it out so it'll go along with their curve. And we have them out. It looks like our little original sculpt survived completely intact. And if you're going to make one mold, you might as well make 3. I figured since the dream's so small, it made more sense to make a bunch of molds so I could pour a few at once, rather than mixing up a tiny little bit of resin at a time. We can get a pretty good look at the inside of the mold. You can see that long slash outcropping for the mouth, as well as the 3 eye indents. You can also see all the little ridges of the sculpt. One of the molds looks like it formed a bit crooked, so I made a note to tilt it when I go to cast. I'll put a quarter or something small under it whenever I go to use it. And now we're ready to take these babies for a spin, or a mold. Speaking of babies, we'll add some more baby powder to the mold and brush it in. I'm planning on painting the resin I'm going to cast, but I'm not sure if the baby powder would cause any issues if you just wanted to cast something in a solid color, or even have it just be clear. I'm thinking it'd probably be a problem. We'll just tap out any excess baby powder and save it for later. You can see our mold with its light coating of powder, which will hopefully allow the casting to slide out easier when it's done. Again, we're going to use our plastic cups. I'm trying to pour around those first 2 blue dots. Even that ends up being a bit more than I needed, but with casting, it's always way better to have a bit extra than not being able to fill your molds. So here we're mixing equal parts of Smoothcast 65D. The thing about it is, unlike the silicone, once you start mixing it, you have 2.5 minutes to get it mixed and poured into your mold. It's also a lot more liquidy. We'll quickly get it poured in, and I'll tap the sides of the molds. I'm hoping it'll help settle into the crevices and reduce the chances of bubbles forming. And here's a time lapse of the resin setting. It happens pretty quickly, and it seems that the thicker the area of the resin, the faster the chemical reaction happens. You can see the thinner bits of resin on top of the mold turn white last. After about an hour, they're ready to unbox. Again, we'll stretch the mold to try and loosen it up and carefully pull and lever out the casting.
Come inside, meet the missus.
And I think that was pretty successful. It captured a bunch of the tiny details in the sculpt. I've got to admit, when I got things in full swing with making these guys, it kind of felt like Breaking Bad. Minus making meth. I may have casted an army of dreans. We're now ready for world domination. Even though the cast mostly came out pretty well, there's still a little bit of cleanup that needs to happen. There's some excess resin on the bottoms that will cut off, kind of following along the edge. And we'll do a little bit of sanding on the bottom and here and there, cleaning up around his antenna. Then we'll take a little file around his tail and antenna. Next, there's these tiny burrs in the eye sockets. We'll carefully grind them down with the Dremel tool. Side by side, you can see that our casted version is kind of lacking in the antenna department. A lot of the casted dreans didn't properly form their antennas. So to fix that, we'll use some Epoxy Sculpt. It's another 2-part situation where you want to mix equal parts. Since we're repairing such a tiny detail, we only need a little bit at a time. We really want the Epoxy Sculpt to embed in the crevices of the informed antennas, and we can use a toothpick to shape such a minute detail. Once we like the way it's looking, we can leave it to set overnight. After the Epoxy Sculpt's set, we'll use some fine-grained sandpaper to create a smooth transition between the 2 materials. Here we've primed them all with a coat of chromium oxide green, which seeing them in this green tone kind of makes me think they'd be hanging out with this bad influence. The color palette we're going to use is titanium white, alizarin crimson, yellow ochre, chromium oxide green, raw umber, and ivory black. Now we'll just paint the inside of the mouth with this light pink. Next we're going to make him look kinda like an olive as we paint in his eye sockets. Maybe only the tiniest bit of this is going to be visible around his eyes. We'll give him a pale yellow belly, and also use some of that yellow on his antennas. And then around his eyes. With most of the flesh tone colors, I ended up painting on 2 coats. Rather than have to handle a bunch of wet paint and to have to repaint my grubby fingerprints on this guy, we'll paint the head first, let that dry, and then paint the body. I'm only making a few of these in this pale blush color. 10 of them will be available soon. If you want to be the first to know when you can get one, I'll put a link to where you can subscribe for updates in the description and pinned comment. Look at that happy little Drean. Next we'll paint the tips of his antenna this darker red shade. And I decided I wanted him to be a spotted Drean, so I'll paint a bunch of dots along his body. Then take a smaller brush and put in a few tiny dots. I sprayed the painted dreans with a couple layers of matte varnish, letting a day go by in between coats, and now we're ready to use these tiny beads for eyes. I ended up making all the eyes the same size, using 4mm beads. Next we'll take some 2-part resin epoxy and put it in each eye socket. I applied a generous amount to make sure the beads didn't come out. Now we'll carefully lay in these bead eyes. I pressed each bead into the epoxy, which was a delicate operation as they sometimes wanted to stick to my fingertips. There, we have all the beads in, and this guy's looking pretty happy about it. Once the eyes have set overnight, we'll finish this up with a coat of high gloss varnish on the eyes and mouth. Normally I'd use 2 to 3 layers on the eyes, but since they're already shiny, I only needed the 1. Subscribe to The Cipher, my monthly newsletter, if you want to be the first to know when these pink dreans go on sale. Dreans are creatures whose presence is said to alter one's dreams towards certain feelings or emotion. Passion, wistfulness, prosperity, and many other mixtures of sentiments are signs that a dream may be in close proximity to a slumberer. A dream feeds off of minute traces of the feelings that are induced, and it is theorized that the coloration of a dream offers some clue as to what they inspire in their dreaming host. Dreams are often kept in captivity for this quality, and some keep a collection of them on hand when they wish to shape dreams. While often used for recreational purposes, there are some who employ dreams for more nefarious purposes, such as torture. If you want to join me in making the imaginary reality, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Until next time, make believe!